Today I wanted to talk about some of the events that have been transpiring over the past few weeks. Now, if you're not familiar with Canadian marijuana companies or you're watching this video in the future, over the past few weeks, the Canadian marijuana companies have gone up quite a bit. So over the past 2 weeks or so, the biggest companies, the biggest Canadian marijuana companies have gone up insane amounts. So Aurora went up the most. It's up 109% in a little bit over 2 weeks. Aphria is doing quite well as well, and some of these smaller companies, they're also up a little bit, but they're not doing as well as the big companies, which is interesting. But I wanted to talk about why specifically these companies have gone up, and there's a very interesting scenario that took place here that give me a little bit of time to explain, and I guarantee for those of you who are actually interested in these things, it's pretty cool what took place here, and it's pretty cool how you could have played this if you had realized at the time what was happening. So to give you some background on what took place, Constellation Brands released on October 30th, they released the fact that they acquired a $245 million they acquired a 9.9% stake in Canopy Growth for $245 million, Canadian dollars that is. And Constellation Brands is a giant beer company worth $43 billion, and because they invested into a marijuana company, all of a sudden a lot of these marijuana companies gained legitimacy and they gained a little bit more awareness in the general investor community. So a lot more people are aware of these companies now, and a lot more people see them as legitimate. And if more of these companies, if more of these beer giants or alcohol giants start investing into these companies, they're going to gain even more legitimacy. And because that happened, Canopy Growth, which is the company that they invested in, it went up 20% on the day that the news was announced. And after that, it went up a lot more. So quite an interesting scenario took place here, because this little peak right here, this little bump that jumped about 20%, this was completely predictable, and it was a really cool scenario that took place here. So let me explain this a little bit more, and then hopefully you'll be able to understand where I'm coming from, because I think this is really cool. Whenever you can predict something in the stock market with information that's out there, you just need to piece it together. I find that really, really cool, and I like that quite a bit. So let me explain. So a lot of these marijuana stocks peaked during 2016, during the elections of 2016, because California and a few other states legalized marijuana, and a lot of people were interested in these stocks. Now, after that point, a lot of these stocks kind of fizzled out. Let me go to years. A lot of these stocks fizzled out a little bit. They went up a little bit after that, and then they had a very long stretch where nothing really happened. So as these stocks kind of leveled out and then started going down, what people were doing is people essentially understood that there was going to be absolutely no news coming out over the course of the next 6 to 10 months about a lot of these companies. And because there was going to be no real news, I mean, everybody already understood what these companies were going to do, people started selling them off, taking their money and going elsewhere. A lot of the people that invested or bought these companies were speculators. They were people who were looking for a higher risk, higher reward type of thing. So a lot of these people went into Bitcoin. A lot of these people probably played the tech companies over the past 10 months or so. And that's what they did. So people took their money, they sold these stocks, and they went elsewhere, which caused the stocks to drop over the next few months. And eventually they did level out and they started going back up again. And recently they did go up fairly significantly. Now, because I follow the Reddit community a lot, I understand generally what this community is thinking. I've been following the weed stocks Reddit for quite a while, and I have a fairly good understanding at any given point about what the general community thinks about these stocks. Just a general understanding, nothing too specific, but I have a fairly good idea. So over the past few months, there were a lot of people who were on the sidelines of these stocks who were clearly interested in them, but they were not quite ready to invest into them. They were either looking for a dip, they were looking for some opportunity, they were looking for something, or they were simply, invested into Bitcoin. Bitcoin was providing them with better returns, and they were not very interested in getting into these stocks quite yet. And because a lot of these people were sitting on the sidelines, what essentially happened when this news got announced about Constellation Brands is a lot of these people got put into a corner. So a lot of these people wanted to make a decent amount of profit off of these stocks, but when this news got announced, Canopy Growth jumped 20%, and all of a sudden a lot of these people who are invested into Bitcoin and have their money elsewhere, they felt pressure to invest into these stocks because they were seeing their potential profits getting lost. So in other words, these companies were going up and the people were not invested into them. So they started panicking and they wanted to invest into them. But because a lot of people were invested into assets like Bitcoin, perhaps Steam investing, something that I do, just they had their money elsewhere, So if you're invested into Bitcoin, it would take you a few days to sell off your Bitcoin and get the money into a brokerage account from a point where you can actually invest it into these stocks. So when this news got announced, a lot of people that were invested into Bitcoin, or at least a portion of the people who were invested into Bitcoin that were also interested in Canopy growth, they were forced to basically sell some of their Bitcoin, not really forced, but they wanted to sell some of their Bitcoin and transfer it into Canopy growth. But obviously there was a delay because the news got announced here, and they had to sell off their Bitcoin, and then there's a day or two, sometimes a little bit more, there's a hold on your money before you can get it into your brokerage account and then spend it. So a few days here, there were a certain amount of people that really wanted to buy into the stock, but they had no way of doing so. And no matter how high the stock went, you automatically knew that there were a good amount of people that wanted to buy into a lot of these companies, but they simply were unable to because their money was tied up in assets like Bitcoin, and they just simply had no way to instantly get it back into a brokerage account. So essentially what you knew, what you could piece together, is that in a few days there was going to be a lot more people throwing money into these stocks and not particularly a lot of people selling them. Now, some people did sell some people did sell on the news, and they were hoping for another dip, but it was a very small minority that did this, and they immediately regretted it. There's a bunch of like threads about people being very mad because they sold off Canopy growth, and then it went up another 30% after that. But what you could essentially piece together from this news is that if you bought this stock after it went up, you knew, like if you had money in your brokerage account, you knew that in a few days people were going to be buying it again, because people were going to be getting their Bitcoins and whatever else, and they were going to be buying it. They just needed time to actually take that money and put it into their account. So regardless of how much this stock went up, there was going to be demand for it regardless, right? Because people are not really concerned about fundamentals with these stocks. They're concerned more about the general idea, and they just needed time to actually get their money and throw it back into the stocks. So you could have predicted this, and you could have bought Canopy growth around here, and you could have put yourself in a very good spot. You could have bought it, and you could have decided to hold it for about a week or two, and you would have had a very, very high chance of making money, and your chance of losing money would have been minuscule. So you could have put yourself in a very favorable scenario to make a decent amount of money in a very short amount of time. I don't know what's going to happen with this stock over the next month or so, but at this point, it was definitely possible to piece together that it was very likely that it was going to go up even more in the next week or two. And that's what I think is really cool. So the fact that this information was out there and that it simply needed to get pieced together, and if you pieced it together, then you had a very high likelihood chance of making money. Like in terms of minimizing risk, having this information available to you and piecing it together, you pretty much, like, the risk of you losing money here was very little, and the risk of you making money was, well, the risk of you making money, I'm not sure what that is, but the chance of you making money was quite high. So I think that this is a really cool scenario. I definitely love it when markets have information that's available to everybody, but people fail to put it together. And I think that this is really where, if you're an intelligent investor, if you know what you're doing, and you can't rely on this sort of stuff all the time, but every once in a while information and situations will come into play that if you sit and think for quite a while about them and manage to piece together a lot of information, like I've been following these stocks for about a year, and it took me a while to piece this information together, but it's possible. But if you manage to piece this information together, you would have made a lot of money off of it, probably, if you actually had the balls to go through with your prediction, which I would have, but I have no, I would have loved to do this, but I have no money. Like, all of my money is currently invested into stuff, and I don't want to sell off my investments before I originally planned them to. So I couldn't do this. I didn't piece this information at this time. I pieced it afterwards, but I didn't really have much of a stake to actually piece this information together. But this is something that I think is really cool. You could have pieced this information together and given yourself a very favorable situation to make money. So let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this was insightful. I definitely think that it is, but let me know if you knew about this sort of stuff. I think that this is quite interesting. I've already said this many different times, but I love it when markets have information that's out there that you can piece together and make money.